People had started arriving early, just to get good seats near the stage. The old community hall in town was already overflowing with loud conversations, camera flashes, cheap perfume, and the smell of popcorn drifting from a small snack stand near the entrance. It was supposed to be nothing more than a simple local talent night. A few songs, some jokes, maybe a magician or two. Most people came only to laugh, relax, and record funny moments on their phones. Near the back of the crowded hall stood Daniel Harper. His work boots were still covered with dust from the construction site. The sleeves of his faded blue shirt were rolled unevenly to his elbows, and small traces of cement clung to his rough hands. He had come straight from work without even going home to change clothes first. Dark circles sat heavily beneath his tired eyes, evidence of too many sleepless nights and too many worries carried alone. Beside him sat his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, nervously swinging her legs beneath the chair. "Dad?" she whispered softly while tugging at his sleeve. "You don't have to do this if you're scared." Daniel looked down at her and forced a gentle smile. "I'm not scared," he lied quietly, but the truth was very different. He wasn't afraid of singing. He was afraid of people, afraid of the laughter, afraid of failing, afraid of becoming another joke in front of strangers. 2 years earlier, Daniel's entire life had changed inside a cold hospital room. His wife Emma had passed away after a long illness, leaving him alone to raise Lily by himself. Since then, life had become painfully quiet. Every morning started before sunrise. Every day was filled with exhausting construction work. Every evening was spent cooking dinner, helping Lily with homework, washing clothes, and trying to be both mother and father at the same time. Some nights, after Lily had fallen asleep, Daniel would quietly hum old songs while washing dishes in the kitchen. Music used to be his dream once. Before bills, before grief, before survival became more important than happiness. But dreams don't always survive real life. A group of young men standing near the stage suddenly noticed the participant number card in Daniel's hand. One of them laughed loudly. "Wait, that guy's performing tonight?" Another smirked while looking Daniel up and down. "Bro looks like he came here to repair the ceiling, not sing." The others burst into laughter immediately. Daniel heard every word. Lily heard them too. Her small smile disappeared instantly as she lowered her eyes toward the floor. Daniel noticed the sadness on her face, but he pretended not to hear the comments. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand once, silently telling her everything would be okay, even though he wasn't sure himself. The host suddenly stepped onto the stage, holding a microphone with exaggerated confidence. "All right, everybody," he shouted cheerfully. "Let's keep this night moving." The crowd clapped casually. A few performances passed quickly. Some singers were decent. Others completely embarrassed themselves, giving the audience exactly the kind of entertainment they wanted. Loud laughter echoed constantly through the hall. Daniel's heartbeat grew faster with every passing minute. Then finally, the announcer glanced down at the next card. "And next," he said while barely hiding an amused grin, "we have Daniel Harper." A few scattered claps echoed weakly around the room. Someone near the back whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "This should be interesting." Another voice laughed. "No way this ends well." Several people already lifted their phones, expecting to record another embarrassing performance for social media later. Daniel slowly stood up from his chair. For one brief second, he almost sat back down again. Maybe this had been a mistake. Maybe the crowd was right. Maybe people like him didn't belong on stages anymore. But then he looked toward Lily. She gave him the smallest nod imaginable. And somehow, that tiny moment gave him enough courage to move. Daniel walked slowly toward the stage while whispers followed him from every direction. Under the bright lights, he suddenly felt even older, even more exhausted than before. The microphone stood in front of him like a test he wasn't sure he could survive. The host smiled awkwardly. "So, Daniel," he asked into the microphone, "what are you singing tonight?" Daniel swallowed hard before answering. "An old song my wife used to love." For the first time all evening, the room became slightly quieter. Not silent, but less cruel. Daniel adjusted the microphone with shaking hands and closed his eyes for a moment. Memories flooded his mind instantly. Emma laughing while singing in the kitchen. Lily dancing barefoot across the living room years ago. Hospital machines beeping softly during the final night he held his wife's hand. He hadn't truly sung since then. Not once. A soft piano melody finally began playing through the speakers. Someone near the front muttered quietly, "This is gonna be bad." Daniel heard it, but this time, he didn't walk away. Before we continue Daniel's unforgettable moment on stage, tell us in the comments, have you ever been judged before people truly knew your story? And if you believe kindness matters more than appearances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories like this. Daniel took one slow breath as the piano melody continued softly through the speakers. His fingers tightened around the microphone while the bright stage lights burned against his tired eyes. The audience still looked unconvinced. Some people crossed their arms impatiently. Others continued holding up their phones, waiting for another embarrassing moment they could laugh at later online. For a second, Daniel's voice almost failed him completely. Then, he started singing. The first line came out low and fragile, like someone reopening an old wound that had never fully healed. A few people in the audience exchanged amused looks, expecting him to lose confidence after the first few notes. But instead, something unexpected happened. His voice steadied. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't the kind of performance designed to impress judges on television. It was real. Every word carried exhaustion, heartbreak, love, and survival. His voice sounded like years of silent pain finally finding a way out. The room slowly began changing. The laughter faded little by little, until the hall grew strangely quiet. Daniel closed his eyes as he sang, no longer seeing the crowd in front of him. Instead, he saw memories. He saw Emma standing beside the kitchen counter years ago, laughing while flour covered her hands after another failed attempt at baking birthday cupcakes. He saw Lily as a toddler sitting on his shoulders during summer festivals. He remembered dancing slowly with Emma in their tiny apartment while an old radio played softly in the background. They had almost no money back then, but somehow they had still felt rich. Then, the memories changed. Hospital hallways, unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen table, nights sitting alone in complete silence after Lily had fallen asleep. Daniel remembered the final promise he made to Emma before she passed away. "Take care of our little girl," she had whispered weakly, and he had tried. God knew he had tried. He worked double shifts until his body ached constantly. He skipped meals so Lily would always have enough food. Some months, he barely paid rent on time. Some nights, he sat awake worrying about school expenses, electricity bills, and whether he was failing as a father. Nobody saw those moments. People only saw an exhausted construction worker with wrinkled clothes and tired eyes. Nobody saw the man carrying grief every single day while pretending to stay strong for his daughter. As Daniel continued singing, the audience slowly began realizing that too. The woman near the front row who had been scrolling on her phone earlier quietly lowered it into her lap. An older man sitting beside the aisle leaned forward slightly, staring at the stage without blinking. Even the teenagers in the back who had been laughing moments ago now sat completely silent. One of the young men who mocked Daniel earlier shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Man," he whispered quietly to his friend, "he's actually good." But it wasn't just the singing. It was the emotion behind it. Daniel wasn't performing like someone desperate for attention. He sang like a man who had survived unbearable loneliness and still found enough strength to keep loving the world anyway. When the chorus arrived, his voice rose stronger than before. The pain inside every lyric became impossible to ignore. His voice cracked slightly on one note, but instead of ruining the performance, it made the entire moment even more powerful, because everyone could hear the truth inside it. No acting, no pretending, no polished perfection, just honesty. Lily sat frozen in her chair near the front, Tears slowly filled her eyes as she watched her father standing beneath the lights. For the first time in years, Daniel no longer looked defeated by life. He looked alive again. A middle-aged woman near the back quietly wiped tears from her cheeks. Beside her, her husband cleared his throat awkwardly while pretending not to get emotional. The atmosphere inside the hall had completely transformed. Earlier, people came hoping to laugh at strangers. Now nobody wanted the song to end. Daniel finally opened his eyes during the second verse. The audience staring back at him no longer looked cruel. The mocking smiles had disappeared completely. Even the host standing near the curtains looked speechless. For the first time all night, Daniel stopped feeling invisible. All those years of silent sacrifice suddenly felt seen. As the music continued building, more phones slowly rose into the air again. But now, people weren't recording him to mock him anymore. They were recording because the moment genuinely mattered. One teenage girl near the stage whispered softly, "This is beautiful." The young men who laughed earlier lowered their heads in embarrassment. One of them even stopped recording completely and slipped his phone back into his pocket. Daniel reached the final chorus. His hands still trembled slightly around the microphone, but his voice carried more strength now than it had at the beginning. It felt as if years of buried grief were finally escaping his chest one lyric at a time. He thought about Emma. He thought about Lily. He thought about every painful morning he forced himself out of bed, despite feeling completely broken inside. And somehow, the music carried all of it. By now, several people in the audience were openly crying. Even Daniel himself struggled to hold back tears as he sang the final lines. The piano softened gently beneath his voice while the entire auditorium remained perfectly silent. Nobody whispered anymore. Nobody laughed. Every single person listened, because somewhere during the performance, Daniel stopped being the poor construction worker embarrassing himself on stage. He became something else entirely. A reminder that every exhausted stranger has a story. A reminder that pain often hides behind ordinary faces. A reminder that some of the strongest people in the world look completely invisible until the moment they finally speak. And as Daniel prepared to sing the final note, the entire room held its breath. The final note hung in the air long after Daniel stopped singing. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The entire hall sat frozen in complete silence, as if people had forgotten where they were. Even the old ceiling fans seemed louder now. Daniel slowly lowered the microphone while trying to steady his breathing. His chest rose heavily beneath the faded blue shirt he had worn straight from work. Part of him still expected laughter. Part of him still expected someone to shout a joke from the back rows. After all, life had taught him not to expect kindness too easily. But then it happened. One person began clapping. A woman near the aisle stood to her feet first, tears still visible in her eyes. Then another person stood. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium exploded into applause. The sound filled every corner of the hall like thunder. People rose from their chairs one after another, until almost everyone in the building was standing. Some wiped tears from their faces openly, without embarrassment anymore. Others clapped so hard their hands turned red. Daniel stood frozen beneath the bright stage lights, overwhelmed by what he was seeing. The same crowd that had laughed at him earlier now looked at him completely differently. Not with pity, not with mockery, but with respect. Near the front row, one of the young men who had made fun of him earlier slowly lowered his head in shame. He couldn't even look toward the stage anymore. "I feel terrible," he admitted quietly to his friend. His friend nodded silently, because suddenly they understood something important. You never truly know what another person is carrying. Lily could not hold back anymore. Before the applause had even finished, she jumped from her chair and ran toward the stage as fast as her small legs could carry her. "Dad!" she cried loudly. Daniel barely had enough time to kneel before she threw her arms tightly around his neck. The audience immediately softened at the sight. Daniel hugged her back carefully, his rough hands trembling against her small shoulders. For a moment, He buried his face against her hair while fighting desperately not to cry in front of everyone. "You were amazing," Lily whispered through tears. That nearly broke him completely. For years, Daniel had felt invisible. Every morning, he woke up before sunrise to work until his body hurt. Every evening, he returned home exhausted, pretending to stay strong, so Lily would never see how scared he really was. He carried grief quietly, because he thought fathers were supposed to survive in silence. Nobody noticed men like him. People only saw worn-out clothes, unpaid bills, tired eyes, and another struggling single parent, barely surviving from paycheck to paycheck. Nobody saw the sacrifices. Nobody saw the loneliness. Nobody saw the nights he sat awake, wondering whether he was failing his daughter. But tonight was different. For those few minutes on stage, people finally saw the human being behind the exhaustion. The host slowly walked back toward the microphone, unusually speechless for once. He paused awkwardly while the crowd laughed softly. "I honestly don't know what to say after that." This time, the laughter carried warmth instead of cruelty. Daniel wiped quickly at his eyes while helping Lily stand beside him. The audience continued applauding loudly. Some people even shouted encouragement from the crowd. "Beautiful performance. You're incredible. Don't stop singing." Daniel looked overwhelmed by all of it. As he stepped off the stage with Lily holding tightly onto his hand, strangers immediately approached him from every direction. An older man shook his hand firmly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I needed that tonight." A woman near the exit wiped tears from her cheeks before speaking softly. "Your wife would have been proud of you." Daniel froze for a second after hearing those words. Emma. He hadn't heard someone speak about her with such kindness in a very long time. He looked down at Lily, standing beside him, smiling proudly up at him. Then finally, after years of holding everything inside, tears escaped his eyes freely. But for the first time in years, those tears did not come from hopelessness. They came from healing. Outside, the cold night air greeted them as they stepped away from the noisy building. The parking lot lights reflected softly against the wet pavement, while distant laughter echoed from inside the hall. Lily squeezed his hand gently. "Mom would have loved your song," she said quietly. Daniel looked up at the night sky for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. A real smile. Not the tired fake smile he used to wear every day so Lily wouldn't worry. This one came from somewhere deeper. For the first time since losing Emma, Daniel finally felt something he thought had disappeared forever. Hope. Sometimes the people the world laughs at are the ones fighting the hardest battles silently. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment of courage for everything to change. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need a little hope today. And tell us in the comments, have you ever judged someone before knowing their story?